All right, here we are back with part 4, and I've left my screen just as we left it in part 3. And I wanted to do one or two things before we actually make our program do something. And the first thing I want to do is I want to open this up, and I want to show you how I can move some things around. I need to put something over here. I need to move these things. So let me just show you a couple ways you can do it. You can, rather than dragging them around independently, I can drag them as a group. Now watch, if I hold down the left mouse button and I just lasso these, look at that, and I let go, I can use my arrow keys. Now I'm going to go down arrow using right arrow. See, I can just move these around. I can lasso all of these and move them around with the arrow key, or I can just grab one of them with the mouse and move them all around very quickly. I can grab all of them by doing Control A and then grabbing them and moving the whole thing around. Okay, so if you ever have to move things, which you will, add new controls, do stuff, don't feel like you have to move them all independently, because if you all get them set up in a nice group and you have them set up just like you want in relation to each other, you know, it kills you to have to move them all like that individually. So then once you've moved them, just click somewhere on the form and it unselects all of them. What I need to do is I need to move this over here. So I'm going to move it down just a skosh. And I want to open up my toolbox again. We're going to go up here to this little icon, and I want to put in what's called a label. I'm going to put in another label, but I want to do something to it that you haven't seen yet, and that's this. I want to, first of all, you remember the thing with labels. I'm going to push F4. I'm going to change the auto size property over here to false, because it's always true. It drives me nuts, but that's the way it is. And I'm going to, now that I have gotten it where I can size it, I want to pull it over here, and I want to make it a little bigger, maybe something like that. And I want to do another couple things with it. I want to change its border, because if I click away from it, look at that, you don't even know it's there, do you? I want it to be real obvious that it's there, and so all of my demos I do for you guys, I change what's called the border style. Now look, if you highlight the label, push F4 if it's not already on there, go over here to where it says border style and pull this down and look what your options are. You can have a fixed single, so that just makes a single line, okay, so that's okay, but I have something I think looks a little cooler, and that is on the border style we have something called a 3D border style. See that? Fixed 3D. And it's a little hard to see on my computer right now, but when you do it for yourself, you'll see it looks like it's a sunken little label, and it just makes it a little easier, and it makes it also obvious that it's there. Now I want to change one thing. I don't want it to say label 3 because that looks kind of rinky-dink. I'm going to click on it once, and I want to show you something. When you have a label that says something like that you don't want, or a text box that says text box 1 or text box 2, you click on, you go to the text property, and you just simply highlight it, and I use the backspace key and hit enter and delete it. You notice now there's nothing in the text property. Now watch what happens when I hit enter. When I hit enter, now we don't see label 3 there anymore. And when I click away, I have this little box. Okay? Now to maybe make it a little more obvious, I'm going to change its background color, not the background color of the form, just that particular box. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker gray. So I pick that gray. Just now you can see it's a box, but I want you to remember it's a label. It's the same thing as the one that says last name. I just changed the border and I changed the background color, so it just looks like a box. We're going to print something in here in a little while. That's why I've changed it for you. Okay. Now I'm going to put this up here. Now we have to do something that's very important from a programmer's point of view. Now your customer, the person using this, your friend or whoever, could care less about this part, but this part is super important for you and I, so I want you to make a note of this. You'll notice that on our buttons I changed what they say. But if you look over on the property, you see this here? It says button 1. This one says button 2. Notice that right here? We can't leave them named that way, because as a programmer we're going to have to tell our program, hey, when they click on this print button, I want it to do something. When they click on clear, I want it to do something else. And when they click on this button that I call quit, I want it to quit my program. But you'll see in a few minutes when we actually tell the computer what to do when they click on the buttons, we have to make darn sure that we name these objects something that you and I will recognize, particularly when you have a lot of them on a form. Otherwise, you're going to get all messed up. So here's what I want to show you, and this is one of the most confusing things for beginning students. But if you'll write this down, it'll help you. The text property of any control only refers to what the control says or what it displays on the screen. All right, text property means the text property of this button is print. If I go down here, it says print. What we want to do now is change the name properties of these controls. In Microsoft in 05, instead of having it here under the M's, they moved it up to the very top. This is the only one that's not alphabetized, I guess because they figure we use it so much. I want to change this button to say something other than button 1. Now here's what I want you to do. As a professional programmer, we have little prefixes, little 3-letter descriptions of what our little controls are so that we can recognize them when we're writing programming code. And for all the buttons, what I want you to do is I want you to name them starting off with BTN, lowercase btn, and then you can call it what you want. Now what I try to do is I try to call it the same thing that it says on the screen, like print, but you don't have to. But the name of this button is now going to be called BTN print. I'm going to hit enter. I want to change the name of this one to BTN clear. Now you notice all I had to do was start typing because Visual Studio knew the last time I was using the name property, that's probably what I want to do again. I'm going to click once on quit, and I'm going to say BTN quit. All right? You'll see why this is important in a minute. This one up here for the first name, this is a text box. Now remember, text boxes are used when you want people to actually enter data. A label is only used when you want to display something, or you want to show a balance or a sales tax or something, and you don't want someone messing with it. Don't put a text box there if you just want to display something. Use a text box only for if you want them to type something. Now text boxes, let's go to the name property. Text boxes start off with a prefix of txt, and again I want them all lowercase, and I'm going to call this one txt first name. And I should probably do it like this. Alright, make it look really nice, make it look really professional. Take your time, spell it right. Okay, I see a lot of people don't spell it right and they don't type them right. Don't use any spaces in these things, okay? No spaces in the names of your controls. I hit enter to lock it in. Now you notice it changed the name of it, but it didn't change anything up here. When we changed the name of the print button, it didn't change what it said. This is for our use. You'll see. Now the next one, this other text box, I want to go ahead and change its name property to txt, and we'll call it last name, which makes sense. And I'm going to hit enter to lock it in. I'm going to change what this label says because we're going to use it. And I'm going to call it LBL. Now labels start with LBL, okay? LBL message, because we're going to give them a message here in a minute, okay? You'll see. Now the checkboxes, they start with CHK, and I'll call it CHK newsletter, okay? And this one here, this checkbox, we'll just call CHK mailing list. Now you notice that in this case I'm just kind of using the same thing as what it says, but you don't have to. But you just don't want it to say checkbox 1, checkbox 2, because you're not going to remember what those are. You may remember it today and tomorrow, but 6 months from now when you come back to work on this, you'll never remember. So that's why we want to change these. Now radio buttons start with RDO. And I'm going to say all RDO full time. You notice I'm just doing it all one word, no spaces, no hyphens or anything. Okay? And this one's going to be RDO part time, as you would expect. All right. Now let's remember here what we did. The buttons all start with BTN in the name property. Has nothing to do with the text property. See, the text property says print. Text property is what it shows on the screen. The name property is what we're going to use to refer to it as a programmer when we write our computer instructions. Text boxes all start with TXT. Labels start with LBL. check boxes, I want you to use CHK, and radio buttons, we're going to use RDO. As we add new controls, I'll show you some new mnemonics for them, or new things for them. Now, in this particular case, I'm not going to do anything with our calendar control for right now. I just put that on there to show you. Although we could, I suppose. Let's just get rid of it. I'm going to click on that and hit delete, and then I'm going to click on my form, and I'm going to just make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to show you something else I want to do with the form. I also want to change the name of the form. When I click on the form in my properties window, and again, if it's not there, you always push F4. You notice the name of it says Form 1. I don't want you to leave your forms, Form 1, Form 2, Form 3. That's not professional, so I want you to name them also. So the way you do it with a form, it's FRM, and what I'm going to do on almost all my programs, I say FRM main, because that's the main form. You can say FRM start, or FRM go, or FRM first page, whatever works for you. I would never criticize you for how you name them. I may criticize you if you don't rename them, and if you leave them Form 1, I'm not going to be too impressed, but I would never criticize you for what you call them. You've got to pick something that makes sense to you, and that's what you use. You'll see this is a lot like creative writing. You'll have your own style. Now I'm going to hit enter here, and remember, the name property on the form has nothing to do with the fact it says learning to program. Which property do we use to, which property did I change on the form, Eric? I know you people who are listening to this can't hear what Eric says, but which property do I change on the form in order to make it say this as opposed to for the text property? That's right. Okay. So I'm just going to keep drilling you guys, because the more you listen to it, then hear it, the better it will be. Yes, Karen. This. Oh, what's the gray box? The gray box, remember, is a label. That's a label object, and remember I called it LBL message. You'll see we're gonna make it display something in a minute. Okay. Any other questions on what I've done so far? Those of you who are listening to the video don't realize there's a class here, and you can't hear them, but I'll try to repeat their questions for you. Okay, everybody's cool with that? All right, let me just show you one other thing that you'll like. I want you to know that the programs that I make for you in class are really very sterile and just straightforward, and they're not very exciting artistically, you can see. But my job here is to show you how to build things. I want to show you what's possible, and then I want you guys to use your creative talents to make them look really cool. But let me just explain a couple things you can do with the form. You can find, if you found a picture, for example, that you wanted, you could make the picture be the background of this form. So you can go out on the internet and grab something. You can grab a background, just much in the same way that you do PowerPoint or on a web page, but you can use that. You can also, if you want to, just change its background color, and I'm going to change its background color now. They call it back color. They don't call it background color, they just call it back color. And it just comes up with this same little set of boxes. If you click on web, first of all, the System tab always comes up, and it tells you, would you want it to look like any of these other things? And they're always very little, black and white, gray, boring-looking things. You can choose web colors now, and so you have a wide list of things. So if I wanted to make this light salmon, for example, which I like a lot of the times, that shows up real nicely, and you can do that if you want to. But again, if you wanted an image, you would do this, background image, and then you search for an image. Now let me just show you something here. On this little box, if it says local resources, what you want to choose, that means it's on your machine somewhere or on a network. If you say import, and I went to my documents, and then I went to my pictures, let's just see if I have anything in there. I have some pictures from Alaska. If I wanted to make this eagle be the background of my form, you see I could do that. Now, the reason it looks kind of rinky-dink is because it's tiling. Tiling means when the picture isn't as big as the form, it starts over. You see how that is? And that doesn't look very exciting. Now, just like all other Windows apps, if you do something you don't like, you can always do Control-Z. Control-Z is your very best friend, and you can get rid of it. Okay? Let me see if just very quickly, if there's one other image that just happens to be a little larger. It just needs something with it's much bigger. Well, there's a little thing of Sitka, Alaska. Okay, so the point is you can customize these things forever but typically what I do on our demos is I keep them very plain and simple just because I want to show you the functionality of it, and then you guys, like I say, can make them look really cool. Okay? Now, any other questions on this before we start? Okay, here's what I want to do. I want to show you how to end a program. Now, I'm in design mode, and I'm going to save this. Now, what do I do, Chuck? What do I do if I want to see how this works? What would you have me do here? Push F5. Okay, let's push F5. Oh, that reminded me, I want to show you one other thing. Now, you notice when I run the form how it starts up over here? Let me close this a minute. I'm going to show you something that I like. I'm going to click on my form and go back to its properties, and I want you to go down here to the bottom where it says Start Position. And if you open up the little box right here, you'll see when this says Center Screen. And I always, now I'm going to save this, I always do that to my forms, and I would really encourage you to do that. So now what happens is the form will start up right in the center of the screen, whether it's a 14-inch monitor or if it's a 62-inch plasma monitor. Wouldn't matter. It's always going to start in the middle of the screen, and I really like that because it looks much more professional. Now I'm going to close this for a moment, and I want to show you something. What we're going to do is I want to set this up so when they hit the quit button, it'll actually close our program, so I don't have to hit this X. See that? Well, it doesn't do anything at the moment. It looks like it's working, but it doesn't do anything. Now, here's what I want you to think about. When they click on quit, I want it to end the program. But Visual Studio doesn't know that. It has no idea what this button is supposed to do. Visual Studio knows that's what it's called and that's what it says, but it has no idea that's what it wants to, that's what I want it to do. But as a programmer, I get to choose what it does. So let me show you how to do that. This time, on the quit button, I want you to double click it. Not single click it, but I want you to double click it. And I'm going to erase this because we don't need this right now. And I'm going to close this so we have plenty of room, and I want to explain to you what we did. As soon as we double click on an object, it brings us to a new page. This is called our code page, and this is where you and I can write instructions to tell the computer what to go do with itself. Now, you'll notice it made a little tab up here, but I can also click on this other tab and get back to my design. So I can go back and forth between the design of the form and the code page where we're going to write instructions. Now, let me explain something. This button is an object. The form is an object. Everything is an object. I know it sounds really cold-hearted, but that's the way it is. And on these objects, they all have characteristics that we call properties, right? Okay. There's also something else that they have, and that is methods. And they also have something called events. Now, let me show you what happens. When a Windows program is running, like this. When Microsoft made the button, they made it so it had some built-in capabilities. Now, we don't have to worry about it because they built it, but they built it so that if somebody clicks on it, Visual Studio will stop what it's doing and go and check to see if it's supposed to do anything. And if we write programming instructions and say, yeah, this is what we want you to do, then it'll carry it out. When you click on a button like this, it triggers what's called an event. Now, think of this. We said that I had properties. Ron has properties of hair color and weight and eye color, right? But Ron has also been programmed to respond to events. If you came up and slugged me in the stomach, I can guarantee you I wouldn't just sit there like nothing happened. I'm not sure what I would do. Depends how big you are, I suppose. But I would respond. Well, that's an event. You by hitting me in the stomach, you just triggered an event in me, and now I'm going to respond. Well, that's exactly what's happening with these little buttons and with all these objects. Microsoft designed it so if someone clicks on the button, we can have it do something. They also created a thing where if the mouse, watch my mouse cursor, if the mouse just gets right over the button, I can have it pop up and leave and give a little message. I could have the mouse cursor change to a different icon. I could make the print button change to a different color. And all these are all things that we will do just so you can kind of get a feel for it. But the first thing that I want to teach you is this. I want you to know what to do when someone clicks on a button. So this is what we're going to do. In design mode, now you can't do it when it's running. I told you to double click on the button, and we are going to tell the button what to do once they click on it. Now let me show you something. Right here, Visual Studio makes what's called a subroutine or an event handler or a click event. It goes by 3 different names, and I will be drilling you on those. But notice what happened. It's going to say, what do you want Visual Studio to do when they click on the little button that Ron called BTN quit? Now this is where naming the objects comes in real handy. If this would have said button 1, button 2, button 3, which it would have if I hadn't renamed it, I'd be kind of hard pressed to know what button I'm working with. You have to know which button you're working with, otherwise it's going to do funny things. So this is a click event. You see this right here. Microsoft put this in for us. This is a click event for the BTN quit button. Now if I'd have called it BTN go home, it would have said BTN go home. All this other stuff, all this, I want you to just try and ignore. I know it's a little hard to ignore, but just ignore it because we don't have to deal with it right now. We don't have to work with it. This is just a way that Visual Studio passes information in and out of this section to the operating system. This is how Windows talks to our instructions. That's all it does. But we don't even need to worry about it anymore. You don't need to worry about private and all that kind of stuff. All I will tell you is this. On your click events, if you need more room to type, just put your cursor there and hit the Enter key. So you can move it down as much as you want. If you want to bring it up, you can do that. And you'll see in a minute, I can move them around. It doesn't matter where they are, as long as I obey one very important rule. You see this up here where it says public class, and it has the name of my form. Remember I changed the name of my form to FRM main? And down here it says end class. Okay. This line up here tells Visual Studio this is where Ron is going to put his programming code. This is where the form starts, and this is the end of the definition of my form. So any code that I write, any instructions that I write, have to be inside here. Now many times what happens is while you're working, you'll erase this end class because you're working on stuff and moving stuff around, and when you try to run it, you're going to get a very crazy error. It says, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't do anything. And it'll come up here with all these kinds of errors, and you'll ask me about it, and I say, oh yeah, you forgot this, or you have to type in end class again. Don't ever feel like you have to start over. You just retype it, and then it all goes away. You'll also notice that when I get rid of something or something's wrong, Visual Studio puts a little blue squiggly under it and says, hey, there's something wrong here, and it has a little message. It says a class statement must have a matching end class. Now sometimes these error messages are very helpful. Sometimes they don't make much sense. And so what you can do is just kind of get used to them, I hope, and ask me about them. And as you work with this a little bit, you'll get the hang of it. But you just have to remember that we have to have a beginning of the form and end of the form. Now let's go back here to my little click event. Carl, what'd you? Yes. If you have a thing that says private sub, you have to have a thing that says end sub, and you'll notice that there are 2 words. Thank you for mentioning that. If I was to erase that and try to run my program, it wouldn't like that either. It's going to say, wait a minute. You've got a problem here, pal. You can't build it like that. Okay? And so if I just come back and I type end sub, hit enter, then it's happy again. So the programming instructions for this button have to go between private sub and end sub. Okay? Thank you for mentioning that. Are you ready? Here's what I want to do. When I click on this button, all we want it to do is close the program, right? Okay. There's a couple ways to do this, but in Visual Studio 5, what we type is this. Let me show you the old way. You could just type end. That'll always close a VB application. Now let's try it. Let's push F5. And now let's push this print button. Okay, it doesn't do anything. Now the reason it doesn't do anything is we haven't programmed it to do anything. But watch when I hit quit. Boom. It quits my program. That's because as soon as I clicked the quit button, Visual Studio stopped what it was doing, and it said, hey, is there anything in the click event that I'm supposed to do for this button? And we put in an instruction that says end, and said, well, I guess I better do that. So that's how it works. Okay. Now the new way of doing a .NET is like this. You type in the word me, and then you do a dot, do a period, and then a little helper thing will come up here, and you can choose, and what I want you to learn to do is to choose from this. You want close, so I'm going to come all the way down to where it says close. What I'd like you to do is get in the habit of hitting the tab key or hitting the space bar and letting Visual Studio pop that in. You notice I didn't type that? I came back here. Let me do it again. I type in me, and I do dot, and it brings up this long list of different things. And what I usually do is I hit the tab key, and it pops it in for me, and then I just hit enter to close out the line. And you'll notice what Visual Basic does that it doesn't do in a lot of the other editors. It capitalizes things for you. It puts in these little parentheses. You don't have to do those by yourself. In C# you have to do all that by yourself. And I should mention, Visual Basic is not case sensitive. So you notice when I did this, I didn't have to worry about typing capital Me. I just type everything in lowercase, and Visual Basic Editor fixes it up for me. And don't worry about typing it in your own way, because it'll change it. It has its own programmed way of doing it. But let me explain something. The word me, and you guys ought to write this down. The word me is kind of new to VisualBasic.net. That refers to the form itself. So instead of saying frm main.close, I can just say me.closed. So write it down. In C#, those of you, I know some of you are taking C#, you would use the word this. This.close is what we use in C#, but in VB it's me. All right, Karen? Me refers to this form. If I had another form, me would refer to the other form. Yeah. So you have one for each one. That's right. Okay. Now, I want to explain something else. Microsoft, in all the new languages, uses something called dotted decimal notation, and that's what you see with this dot. When you want something to do something, you separate it by these little dots most of the time, or sometimes we put things in these parentheses. But this is called dotted decimal notation. Now, what I want to point out one thing new here is this. You see the word close? Close is an action. Wouldn't you agree that's like a verb, right? All right. That's like Ron dot jump. Let me show you. This is like saying Ron dot jump. Ron dot run. See that? Now, Visual Basic has no idea what a Ron is, so that's why it's complaining. But the point is, when you say Ron.jump, that's telling Ron, start jumping. When you say Ron.run, that means Ron, start running. When we say me.close, we say, hey, form, go close yourself. Now these words, close, jump, and run, are all action words. But in Visual Basic and in Visual Studio programming in general, they're called methods. A method is an action. Okay? Very important that you understand that. Now, these actions are things that you and I as programmers tell the object what to do with itself. The customer has no idea that this is here. They never see this. You don't ever want to give someone your code. This code, by the way, all this stuff here, this programming code, this is called source code. And this is stuff that you protect. If you were writing a new game and you're trying to make millions of dollars, for goodness sakes, you don't ever let anybody see your source code. Otherwise, they know how your program runs and they can steal it and make changes. You protect this. Okay? Now, if it's some little thing you're just doing for yourself or your friend, that doesn't make any difference. But I just want you to know that this is the source code. And again, this is an event handler. It's handling the event called the click event, because when we click on this button, it's been programmed by Microsoft to be able to respond. If they didn't do that, then we couldn't make it do anything. But they made it very, very generic so we could make it do whatever we want. If I wanted to, if I clicked on quit, I could tell it to make the background of the form blue and not quit. I can make it do whatever I want. You could really mess up your friends. If it said quit or send me an email and in fact it closed the program or sent them out to a website or something, they would just be totally confused. But you can do whatever you want. You're not limited by what's normal or what we regularly do. All right, so you can play tricks on people, you can mess things up, you can do whatever you want, but the problem is you're going to mess yourself up sometimes. So in this event handler, which is also called a subroutine, see it has sub, or a click event, because this is the click event for the button. It doesn't matter what you call them, just as long as you know that's what they are. This is where Visual Basic comes in and executes these commands one miserable line at a time. Okay, that one's the first line, then it would do this one, and it would do this one if it knew what they were. Okay, you got to remember that every line is executed in order unless you tell it to do something different. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of this. I can delete it, or I can do this. I want to show you a little trick. Since this is an error, but I want to leave it there just maybe to remind myself what they do, I can highlight them like that, and I can go up here to this button, see this? and I can comment these out. In Visual Basic, when you want to comment something or leave notes to yourself, you just start it with a little apostrophe. See how I put the apostrophe in? And if I want to undo it, I highlight it and I go uncomment. See the little thing, uncomment selected lines? Now what I do, and you'll see in all the applications, that I put in a apostrophe, and I've gotten the habit of using 3 dashes, and I'll put in comments not only for me but for you. And what that means is that next section of code is going to close the application. Now if I don't want this, I just simply highlight it and hit the delete key. I'm going to hit delete a few times and bring this up here. There's no use having all that white space. It just makes it harder to read. So now if I run my application, I have one piece of programming code, one instruction that says when they click on this, we're going to quit. Alright? So now what you've learned is that these objects not only have properties, but they have methods that have been programmed into them by Microsoft, not by me. And Microsoft used the word close. And when you say me.close, you're saying form, whatever form you're working with, I want you to go close yourself. We're using dotted decimal notation. That's what the little dot is. Close is an action, so that means it's a method. Okay? And Visual Studio will put in all the other punctuation for you. You don't have to worry about it. It's not case sensitive. Please don't try to make this, something else, because it'll just do what it wants anyway. You're just wasting your time. And just try to remember that if you have a thing up here that says public class where your form starts, you've got to have also the 2 words at the bottom, end classes. And if you happen to erase them, you can type them in. If you happen to mess this up and erase it, you can just type it in again. Okay, so it doesn't matter. This stuff is just like a text document. It doesn't matter where this is on the screen because Visual Basic converts all this into its own language when it runs, and it doesn't matter where you put this. You just remember private sub, end sub. Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay, let's stop on this one, and then on the next one we'll go ahead and we'll add some more functionality to our project.